Okay, I think I'm now live. And I'm talking because the last Sexy First Friday, my best friend watched it and said I made him feel awkward at the beginning by being silent. So, hey everyone. We're just waiting for Lyndsey. I'm gonna invite her. Okay, she should be coming on now. Hi, Lyndsey.
Get the camera the right way, huh? Hi, nice to see you, Sam.
I tried talking at the beginning because apparently it made people feel awkward last time when it was just my face silent while I was trying to get you to join. So, why don't we quickly introduce ourselves in case there's new folks here, and then we're doing something kind of different this time, so we'll explain that. Um, so, if you don't know me, I'm Sam E. Greenberg. I'm a sexuality researcher and an Enneagram researcher, and I'm also a sexuality and Enneagram coach. And my research focuses on Enneagram type, dominant instinct, and how they overlap with sexual desire and expression.
And my name is Lyndsey Fraser. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, as well as a certified sex therapist, where I have a small private practice in South Minneapolis, where I specialize in relationships and sexuality, utilizing the Enneagram.
Cool. So if you've been at Sexy First Fridays before, what we normally do is we have a topic and then I'll talk about the research angle on the topic and Lyndsey talks about the clinical angle. We love doing that and we'll go back to doing that, don't worry. But we thought we'd take a break and do something fun. We're gonna have the subject this time be ourselves. So we asked for your questions about us. Specifically, we're going to mostly focus on instincts and stacking. So I'm, if you don't know, a type 5 with sexual instinct dominant, then social, and I'm self-preservation repressed. And Lyndsey, why don't you say yours?
Yes, so I am a 9. I have social in the dominant position and sexual instinct in the repressed.
So because we have very different stackings, we thought it might be fun to talk about our own personal approaches to relationships and sexuality. So we asked for your questions. We got quite a few, and I have literally put them in a hat to pick them out. So we don't know exactly which ones we'll be answering. So it's extra fun. And I will say a bunch of people sent in questions not about so much us or about instincts and stacking, but about pairings. For example, like I'm a 3 and my partner's a 5, we have this issue. We did, if you sent those in, we saw them, we love you. Some of those were really vulnerable. We are going to answer those, but we'll do that in a different episode. So today's focus is going to be on ourselves and instincts and stacking. Hopefully that makes sense.
It does.
Should we pick a question? Okay. So this one says, I often have trouble understanding the difference between the value social dominant and sexual dominant place on partners. It seems to me like a lot of social dominants really value having a partner over belonging to the group, question mark. So, Lyndsey, why don't you start out because there's more of a social dominant focus here.
I think that I wasn't really sure how to answer this question because the bonding end is essential sort of to the social dominant, right? Like you want to belong and have a position, but it's not about like one's more important than the other as far as the group or the partnership. Also keeping in mind that I have sexual instinct in the repressed position, so I'm going to be coming from more of a social self-preservation place. But it's like what can happen for me sometimes in my relationship with my partner. And for those of that you don't know, my partner is a 5, a self-preservation 5, who has social in the repressed position, which is a really interesting dynamic for partnership too, where I have the dominant, he is repressed. And we kind of can have difficulty sometimes navigating that. But for me, what happens is like you want your partner to be a part of the group. And so with me having a partner that's social, social repressed, like he doesn't always care about that or want that or need that. I'm kind of like, I want to bring you along. I want you to be a part of it. And I want to like people to know kind of who my partner is. But it isn't that the group or my partner is more important, though my partner's complaints sometimes can be. Oh gosh, Crystal's gonna be, he doesn't like me sharing too personal stuff.
Okay, Chris, don't stop watching. And
Chris,
also,
don't
Mom and
watch
Dad,
if you're
don't watch
watching.
this one.
I can be more focused sometimes on the groups that I'm a part of. And so sometimes that then what can happen for my partner is like, I'm kind of navigating, wanting to know where my position is. Do I have a position that belongs? I do have to like process that a lot with him. And I think that that's kind of probably irritating to him, to be completely honest. And sometimes more attention might go to the group than the partner, but it isn't that one's more important than the other. I hope that makes sense. Does that make sense, Sam?
It makes sense to me, yeah. And I think when you said it might be annoying to him, that's another dynamic we can mention, which is because he's social repressed, often our repressed instinct, we feel like people who are really focused on it are like wasting their time. It's sort of like that stuff's not important, even though, of course, we know all three instincts are important. So that's another dynamic with him being social repressed. And then another question, part of this question was the difference in the value that a social dominant and a sexual dominant would place on partners. So I'll chime in with that, which is that as a sexual dominant, the value I place on a partner is passion. It's dissolving. So what I want from a partner is someone that will merge completely with me, that will like dissolve all boundaries, basically doesn't have boundaries, that we can have experiences where there's nothing between us, basically we're one. That's really big for a sexual dominant, whereas for a social dominant it's more of like a social bonding within the relationship that's important as two individuals. And Lyndsey, you can say more about that if you have anything.
Yeah, I think that the way that I think about it is just even how you go about like attracting partners, I think is really interesting. And I can just talk about sort of what my tactic to flirt and attract people has been is like I use relational techniques, right? So it's like that getting to know the person, asking them questions about themselves, and kind of that engagement of like building a relationship. It isn't about this energy that's happening or occurring. Like I want to get to know you to see whether pursuing something more with you is something that I want or desire. So it's interesting to me, because like even when you talk about that like passion and desire, and I think we'll maybe talk more about this later, but like I can get actually really overwhelmed when sexual instinct energy comes at me, especially when there has been attraction in the past. I'm like, back off. Go back, like you don't know me yet. How do you know that you want sort of, and it's just a very interesting dynamic. And it's like I can feel like kind of like what I call like cozy and warm. And sometimes people might not actually know that I'm flirting with them in the past, because I have just been like, I want to get to know you and see whether I want to pursue you or whether I still continue to have desire with you. So it's a very interesting, like when I hear you speak, like we do this very differently. Like it's not about merging at all for me. Though there is some merging because I'm a 9, but it's different than sexual instinct merging.
This is so interesting. So I think we do have a specific question for you about that. So hopefully we'll pick that one. And let's choose another question, but I'm going to say like 20 more seconds on this. When you said like how I attract partners, it's just like the way I do it couldn't be more different, which is that I basically know, I'm going to say within seconds to minutes, if like I'm interested in someone, and it's based on this, what we talk about with radar that sexual dominants have for the person that they'll have the most chemistry with. It's like I meet them, I feel that, and then I'm like, yeah, I might decide whether I want to pursue it or not, but I feel it right away. So that's really different. So let's choose another question. Okay, this one's a little bit less specific to us, but we can answer maybe from your clinical experience. how can a sexual dominant and self-preservation dominant both get what they want? Because opposite needs. And I think they mean sexually specifically. Do you have thoughts on that?
Um, well, I think one of the really interesting things that happens, and this happened for me as well, is that sexual instinct repressed individuals often have no clue what the sexual instinct dominant person is talking about when they say passion, excitement, and desire. And I know that if people have seen me speak in previous like podcasts or other things like that, I've alluded to this in my previous longer term relationship where I had a previous partner before my husband who would complain about me not being passionate enough. And in my head, I'd be like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm passionate. I got a career. I'm moving towards this. I'm moving towards that. And what he was really referring to is this sexual instinct energy, desirability, playing with sexual energy. And so I think the hard thing is when you have a sexual instinct dominant and a sexual instinct repressed person in relationship is that unlike self-preservation and social, where we have much better definitions of what those things look like, though social can be a little convoluted as well, they honestly don't often have a clue of what you are talking about when you want more of this desirability and playing with sexual energy. I still struggle today, even though I understand it significantly better than I have in the past. And honestly, it's a really hard clinical issue to work with. One of the things that I will do for the person that's in the sexual instinct repressed position is to help them kind of get in touch with, like, what is this? Like, what is your partner talking about? That oftentimes is like giving them some different sort of literature or things that are out there about that. But it's something you have to experience. And so oftentimes, like, one way to do that, which I think talked about before on here, is like movement with dance and just kind of like feeling the music, going with the music. You know, I've talked about wearing brighter clothing, though I look at myself today and I'm in white. I didn't wear anything bright today. And then sometimes what you can do then is like finding, so like if they have overlap, right? So like if like, let's say it's sexual instinct dominant and sexual instinct repressed, but you have social overlap or you have self-preservation overlap. And I know that Sam has spoken to this before, and in a minute I will have her kind of take this, but it's like you can sometimes use that as the thing to kind of start with. So like if we both have social overlap, right, maybe in the center, the bonding or the connection or sort of that warmth energy is still going to be essential to both, and they're kind of supporting the other. So it's like you can kind of use that second instinct as a way to kind of do that. And then the same thing with sort of self-preservation, which tends to focus more on the pleasure sensations and orgasm and those types of things, and being comfortable. You can kind of use that as a little bit of your overlap on how you do that. But I'd like to go to Sam and hear a little bit about how she navigates that with clients that she has.
Yeah, so I see this a lot in coaching because this is one of the primary differences that happens in couples that can create some trouble in their sexual life or even just their romantic life. And one thing I want to mention about this is if you have a self-preservation dominant person, especially if they have sexual in the repressed position, but even if they don't. So you have basically self-preservation energy and you have sexual dominant energy. The sexual dominant is like, why aren't you telling me you love me, you want me, you know, I'm the best thing that's ever happened to you, like throw everything off the kitchen counter and like make love to me, you know. And the self-pres is like, you know I love you. We're married. Like, why do I need to say it all the time? When you like that, doesn't that take away from the fact that I love you if I'm constantly saying it? And it's like this real difference in values and the way that each wants to be communicating or not communicating their feelings. So usually with a self-pres dominant and a sexual dominant couple, I work a lot on meeting in the middle, which maybe that sounds obvious, but I think it takes a lot of work. The self-pres dominant person has to get used to saying expressive things and doing passionate, spontaneous things more than they like, more than is comfortable. And we got a nice comment that says, like, this is exactly my wife and I. And the sexual dominant has to be okay with less of that. Like, we have to remember that our dominant instinct is out of balance. That's why it's dominant. So basically, we have it too much. We're doing it too much. We're leaking energy to it. So, yes, sexual dominant, you might think that one of your partners say I love you 5 times a day is like objectively better, but you have to remember like you're being motivated by like leaky energy in the sexual arena. So the sexual dominant, I work a lot with like trusting that you have a connection, even if you're not being reminded of it all the time. And then like slowly over time, the partners can move to the middle. So the self-pres is uncomfortable, the sexual is uncomfortable, but each is getting a little more of their preferred style of affection and even sexuality. Does that make sense?
That does make sense.
Okay, we have a bunch more questions, so let's pick another one. My trusty hat. Okay, this is a fun one, not based on instinct, but type. It says, for both of us, what's one trait of a typical 9 or typical 5 that you don't really see in yourself? Okay, I think I could answer this, so I'll go first. I'm gonna like sort of answer the reverse and then answer it. So one trait that I have that I don't see in other 5s very much, and this does relate to instinct, is that I love attention. So we know 5s are like, you know, behind closed doors, pretty extremely private, and they tend to like not like attention. I've always been like, put me on a stage. I do like attention, and that's the sexual dominant at work. But I have that more than other sexual 5s that I've met. But what's interesting is if I get attention that I didn't specifically orchestrate for me to have it, like it just comes without me wanting it, then I'm like a regular 5. Like I basically want to fight or flight, like get me away from this. So I'd say the trait typical of the 5 that I don't have is this like shying away from the spotlight thing. I love the spotlight, but it still has to be like me in control. How about you, Lyndsey? What's one trait typical of a 9 that you don't really see in yourself?
This one is hard for me because I think 9s can look all kinds of different ways. But some of the feedback that I've gotten before is that I may not be as like sunny and friendly as all 9s are. And I can have a little bit of, I have a pretty strong one wing, and I think it's also influenced by the sexual instinct repressed position, and maybe just even the social dominant, and sort of like sometimes kind of having like, there's a little bit of like, this is the right way, and kind of being a little bit rigid in things that I believe that there is a right or wrong way with, even though overall I'm a very flexible and easygoing and go with the flow person. And I think too, because I'm a social 9, so like I think this is true for a lot of social 9s though too, is like sort of that I am really able to sort of be able to like show up, and I do a lot of things for my career. I will share aspects of who I am, but I do find that when it comes to personal stuff, I'm probably more like a typical 9, where it's like I don't think people are really that interested or really would want to know. And I've had comments before, like when people do ask me, like, "Wow, like you know a lot more than we actually thought you did," or like you haven't shared the things that you know. So like I have some of those tendencies where I can be still sort of like that idea of like, you know, my presence doesn't matter, anybody can kind of do what I do, sort of stance I think is pretty typical for 9s. But this is a hard question for me because I think we have an idea of what 9s look like, and actually we all can look quite a bit different. I feel them when they're with me. Like I kind of know like when other people are 9s, and I kind of know what's interesting in the therapy perspective is like I know the 9s game. And I call 9s out on it all the time.
What's the game? Tell us the game.
Well, you want the therapist to like you, and you try to accommodate, and you're not necessarily honest about what's really going on with you. So, and I think what's interesting, if anybody on here is a therapist, in therapy with nines in particular, we want relationship building, we want connection, and the more that gets built, the more you can challenge, the more you can engage with us. But like, here's a really interesting thing that I think a lot of us will do. We'll nod and say, yeah, I'm going to do that. In our head, we'll say, nope, no way in hell that I'm going to do that thing you just asked me to do. So, and I know this because I've been this client for therapists, and they may not have known that. So because I know sort of how they operate in therapy, I will kind of challenge them a little bit, and I can tell them the facial expressions about whether or not it's little cues, little subtle cues. I'll be like, you're not going to do, and I'll say, like, oh, I don't think you actually want to do what I just suggested. Let's talk about that. And a lot of my nines actually like it that I will do that. Like it and don't like it, I guess, is probably fair to say. I always tell them, like, I know the game you're playing because I play it too.
Incidentally, I think that nines for me are the hardest clients, and fives are a close second. So we're very sorry to everyone that we've ever been in therapy with for being a terrible client. I think that you probably are a great therapist for nines just because of that reason, that you know their game. And I've seen that too in coaching, and it's like you have to really be able to read the energy, which a lot of people can't do with nines, of like they're telling you to avoid conflict what you want to hear, and you have to be like, you are under duress right now, and that's why you're answering this way, not because you want to. And then, sometimes they'll admit it, sometimes they still won't. So it can be tricky. But let's pick another question. This one's specifically for you, Lyndsey. So what is your experience as a sexual instinct repressed person when a sexual instinct dominant person is interested in you? And I think this means not just romantic or sexual, but any kind of interest. You started to speak to this earlier. So tell us about your experience with that.
So my experience a lot of times when that sexual instinct energy comes at me is to be really overwhelmed. Sort of that like, back off, you're like too much in my business. Especially I find with my experience of sexual instinct dominant people is like they have no problem like sort of like getting into my like boundary space. So like touching me, looking me in the eyes, getting really close, and I'm like, like I don't know you, kind of back off. Can you just like take a few steps back? If I know you can come into that space. One of the examples that I have shared before that happened to me when I was sort of like in my later 20s is like I was walking. So people that are from Minneapolis, I don't know if there are people on here that are not, but like I was walking in Uptown on Hennepin Avenue, and they have sort of these like restaurants with like chairs outside and patios and these types of things. And I'm walking with a friend, and this guy like comes rushing at me and like leaps over the railing and is like, I just have to know you. And I'm like, oh, okay, like, who are you, and like why do you have to know me? And now like looking on the future, is that like in that instance, right, like this is sexual instinct energy, maybe not well boundaried, right, coming at me being like, I feel something with this individual person, I feel a zing, I feel a zap, and like I'm going to move towards that. And for me it's always been it can be overwhelming. And even when it's not like attraction related, right? Like when people are just excited about sort of like what I do and who I am and they want to interact, like there can be what feels like to me poorer boundaries, right? Like more in my personal bubble, like not giving me the space, touching me without asking, and those types of things too. And I don't think all nines are particularly like this around touch, but I am in particular, like unless I know you, I really don't want you touching me. So if I know you and you're a close friend or you're my husband or my children, you can touch me all you want. But if I've just met you, you probably shouldn't. And sometimes I feel like sexual instinct dominant people are just, they have no problem like touching your shoulder or touching your arm, and to kind of like, communicate or to get you kind of like directed at them. And I'm always just like, please stop touching me, but I'm trying to be nice because I'm a 9, so I just keep smiling. By the way, I do love sexually instinct dominant people. Like, as I'm saying this, a lot of my very good friends are, but that has been the experience that I have. And I think it depends sometimes on type as well. I feel like, you know, eights in particular that are sexual instinct dominant are maybe a little bit more likely to cross my boundary, but like sexual instinct dominant fives are less likely because they're just more boundaried in general. And so I think it's really important to kind of say too that I've noticed, like, now that I understand the Enneagram a little bit more, that it's more the assertive types that have been more difficult for me around sexual instinct dominant energy versus the others, because they just are a little bit different on how they will express that.
I'm very sorry on behalf of all sexual dominant people. It's not that we're crossing your boundaries on purpose. It's just that we don't have any, so we don't know that other people have them. But that definitely sounds tricky. So I think we have time for one more. Let's see. Okay, so this is specific sexual dominant question. So do sexual dominants tend to feel like they need or want a partner? Or is it more like they go looking for a lot of special ones to merge with or attract? Okay, so this, in my opinion, 100% dependent on type. So this is where we get our type instinct overlap. So I think this person is saying, like, do sexual dominants like always need someone, or is it just like they can just go merge with whoever and they don't need a partner? So if you have your sexual twos, sexual fours, you see them typically always with partners, and they may be serial monogamous, they may be like polyamorous and have lots of partners, but typically you would see them always with partners. Sexual threes you often see always with partners, but when you get into like sexual five, sexual nine, I would say you don't always see them with partners. And for like us fives and nines, yes, we need that merging and that chemistry, but not necessarily with an active partner. And something I've seen with sexual fives, with myself a little bit, but with a lot of other sexual fives that I've met, is that they can have this entire thing happening in their head, and they don't even have to know the person, interact with the person. So they'll be having this like merging chemistry thing with like their dentist who smiled at them, but like they never have to have a real relationship with them. So I think I didn't mention every single type here, but it definitely varies by type. And then there's some that are kind of in the middle, like sexual ones, I think you see often have partners, but sometimes not. But definitely every sexual two and sexual four I know is basically always with a partner. So I think it depends. And Lyndsey, I'd be curious if your perspective on this.
I would agree with you. I think it depends on the type, because you're right. Most of the time, sexual twos are in what I see kind of more monogamous relationships. There may be lots of them, but it's kind of from, you know, and the same thing with threes. And then it just kind of depends on the others. Some are, some aren't, right? And I find that a lot of times it's just about the desirability, like, or the zing or the zap, or kind of wanting to get that kind of energy. And it isn't necessarily always about having a partnership. Here again, I think it would depend on what is second, right? Your sexual socials, more likely, but also, you know, maybe more okay with kind of one-off experiences with people too, if they feel that kind of connection there. So I think it just really, it depends. I think there is more nuance with type around this about whether they would be in partnerships. And I think it's good to keep in mind, not all socials want partnerships either. So I think making the assumption of one or the other for all three is like, people choose partnership for kind of all kinds of different reasons. And I feel like we have to take in the nuance of your family of origin, the culture you're in, you know, all these other kind of dynamics that come into play, past relational issues or concerns. And so this one, to me in particular, like, there's so many layers to it that we couldn't really put it to like sexual instinct dominance, self-preservation dominance, or social dominance want this as far as partnerships. What we do know is that all human beings want connection, in some sort of partnership with others, whether that's friendships or romantic relationships. We are a relational species. That's how we are. But I think that I could like go through all the different layers that influence this, and there's quite a few. So this one's harder for me to say it's one thing or the other.
Even fives, by the way, fives, if you're watching, we have convinced ourselves that we don't want partnership, but we actually do need it. So that's a whole another episode. We're actually at time already. That went very fast. So that was some inside info about us and how our different stackings are at play, our types. Like I said, we have a bunch of questions on type pairings that we'll get to in another episode. And we have some audience suggestions for our topics for our next couple of months, but we'd love to hear from you guys. Any questions you have, follow-up questions about this episode, and ideas you want us to cover for the next Sexy First Fridays. We got another come out with a regular podcast. You guys need to pay someone to do our production and editing, and then we'll do a podcast. It's so much work on the back end that we don't have time for, but we would love to. So we appreciate you. Thanks for watching.
Thank you. We've been enjoying our Sexy First Fridays, and we hope to see you next month in June.
Bye, Lyndsey.
Bye, Sam. Have a great rest of the day.